Hey, it's me again. Sunday, October 29th, 2023. Dev here for update number 2 of potentially many. How was your week? Can't hear you. How was mine? Mine was ceremony of opposites. It was fraught with equal parts drama and what would be the opposite of drama? Non-drama. I've been writing, and it's still at that point where I'm trying to figure out what it is that I'm trying to say. And amidst that, I've been writing a ton of things. I've had a couple of moments this week of thinking, oh, that's really cool. This is great. And then digging into it, and only an hour later being like, yeah. Or I think it was 2 nights ago I wrote something that I thought was fantastic. And to the point where the litmus test for that is often whether or not I remember it the next day, or if it sticks around, like subconsciously I'll be doing other things, and then the melody just kind of is pervasive in my mind's eye. And that's typically an indicator that a project is on the right path, when those things start to stick and become more unavoidable. And I woke up the next day and I had forgotten it. So we're still in that part of the process. But I'm enjoying it, and I leave this coming Saturday, for Australia and Japan. And that is the last run, I guess, of the Lightwork album cycle, which was a limited touring cycle, but mercifully, because I've got so much that I want to do. But if you are in Australia, we have 4 shows. Starts in Perth, and then I think it's Melbourne, Sydney, Brisbane. Melbourne and Sydney are sold out, thank you. But there's still a few tickets left for Brisbane and Perth. So, yeah. So I go straight from Vancouver to Perth, which is, that's a heck of a flight. But I always love going to Australia. I've been going there for so many years, and got a lot of friends, and I like it a lot. So it's been a long time coming, and I look forward to that tour. But then once it's done, I can really get into writing, and frankly, I can't wait. So what else have I got for an update for you this week? So this last week was Dream Piece week, and as is tradition with the work that I put out, because so many of the projects that I do are different from each other, there's a tendency in people to think that when I release something, it's indicative of a new direction. Like I put out the Dream Piece stuff, and people are going, well, I don't know quite how I feel about this new direction. And for those of you who are new to my world and to my work, I do whatever I feel like at the time, because that's the criteria for it being something that I think is worth putting out, is if in the moment it means something to me. But everything's a reaction to everything else, right? So what I do with Dream Piece is a reaction to, well, in that case, just circumstantial. It was a difficult 6 months, year. So that seemed like the only thing that when I sat to write, which I love doing, I just love playing music, I love writing, that was the only thing that seemed that it was the right move for me. It was the only thing that I felt compelled to do. And I continue to do Dream Piece, of course, but it was a moment. And speaking of which, this coming week is going to be another moment which ought to delight some and confuse many. This next week I'm dubbing Puzzle Week. And for those of you who are like rolling your eyes on that, like, oh my God, here he goes again about that project. I promise, after this next week, I won't harp on it anymore. But the reason why I would like to put it out before I go to Australia is it had been released during the pandemic as an independent release. It didn't come out through Inside Out or Sony, and as a result, there's not a lot of people that heard it. And to be fair, it's probably a good thing in some sense, because in the same way that Dream Piece is and was a reaction to a period of my life that was overstimulating, so I just wanted to make something that acted as a balm, BALM, for that. Puzzle was a reaction to the pandemic, and truthfully, there's a lot of people that thought that Light Work was the follow-up to Empath, but actually it was the Puzzle. And it didn't get seen or heard by many people, and this week you'll probably understand why that is potentially a good thing career-wise, but But yeah, it was as much of an effort for me as Empath or any of the other ones. But it was a reaction of the pandemic and all the chaos that was going on during that period. And the concept of the puzzle I'll explain as the week goes on. It's not a big deal, but it's just every record has a concept, so I might as well explain it. And for today, what I will say about it is the process in which was incorporated to create that record was all remote. So it included many people in my life, and their parents and their kids and their friends, and so it's not necessarily musicians. It was a project that was meant to summarize the state of my personal world during the course of the pandemic that in some ways mirrors the experience of many of us. And by that I mean I invited basically everybody in my life to participate in it, whether or not they were musicians or if they could even play guitar. And so as you're listening through to it, you'll hear these things. You'll be like, what is that? That doesn't make any sense. But the whole purpose of it was I did a stream of conscious jam. That from that, I contacted all these people, I think around 50 people. And the criteria for their involvement was listen to these sections. And what we're trying to do is extrapolate from these clouds of ambience, things that would melodically sort of exist. It's like the whole voices in the fan idea, where if you listen to something repetitively, things start to appear. So the music for Puzzle evolved. It's like you're jamming with chaos. And there was no criteria for the people who were participating. Said, essentially, do it wherever you feel, add whatever you want. The only thing I ask is that you listen. And so what you're doing brings out something that is technically already melodically contained within those movements. And then my role, when I got 50 people's contributions, at first it was a smattering here and there. Somebody would send a little something, somebody would send a little something else. But then once people started to become interested in it, the participants, I would receive sometimes 10 transfers a day from different people who had no awareness of what the other people were doing. And then certain sections ended up, 10 people would be contributing something to the same section. And in a lot of cases, it was really brilliant stuff they were contributing. But then my role became, well, how do you incorporate this into this section without preferential treatment to any of these people? Because they're all in your life. The puzzle was like, how do you make this work? And so putting it together and mixing it was intense. And then I made a film based off of it during the pandemic, and that's what I'm going to put out first, maybe, or second. Maybe I'll put it out on Tuesday, and tomorrow I'll go through some of the technical aspects of it. And the film was, I tried to make an analogy, or I guess a metaphor, I can always get those two confused, of the pandemic and how so much of our internal bias and so much of our internal thought processes inform our reality in some way. And so every time you make a decision, whether or not it's, shall I do a update on Sunday or shall I sit and drink coffee and play my guitar for a while, each one of those things not only has ramifications, but is informed by a lifetime of the things that have made you you, whether or not that's childhood trauma or your relationship with your parents, or maybe you have a need to please, or whatever it is. Every decision, however inconsequential it may seem at the time, is based on an unconscious programming from your past. And to figure out the puzzle, the idea is to recognize that that's happening. And so the film is meant to represent a day in a character's life who's going through the fear and the uncertainty that period of our lives brought to us. And then at the end of it, the character is meant to have solved that, to figure out how much of his unconscious processes are within his capacity or her capacity to evaluate, and then make decisions based on that are congruent with what it is that they want, as opposed to the things that they're suffering with by their own hand unconsciously. No wonder it was not a Billboard hit. It's funny, when I think about all these projects, I even remember thinking whilst doing the puzzle and whilst doing these things that I've been doing this week, it's easy to second guess yourself because you think, no, it's too much, it's too pretentious, it's too silly, it's too convoluted, whatever it is, dream piece, it's too hippie, But I would argue that one of the most important steps to take with your creative process is to get past that, because if it's a part of you that you feel compelled to represent, that's the criteria. And if you're not honoring that, I think that you're maybe on the wrong path for what it is that you're trying to do in the future. It's like if you're dissuaded from doing something that you feel compelled to do based on thinking, well, other people aren't going to like it, or they're not going to appreciate it, they're not going to understand it, or whatever. I think that's a misstep. Conversely, though, you have to, as a result of taking the steps to do those things that you feel compelled to do, accept the fact that there's going to be a faction of people that just simply don't like it or don't understand it. But going back to the people-pleasing thing, if you're so concerned about pleasing everybody, I mean, good luck with that, right? You can't please anybody. So you might as well be true to yourself. So this week, the puzzle, I'm going to do videos, and then we'll put the film out, and then I'm going to stop talking about it. So that's that. What else has happened over the past week? Over the past 6 months, basically, I don't produce bands anymore. No desire. And I rarely mix bands. But over the past 6 months, I did mix a band slowly, and it was a very technically challenging project. There were hurdles to overcome in terms of the recording and lots of things. But there's a band based in Beijing that was signed to Inside Out Records and is signed to Inside Out Records that they asked me to mix, and they're called OU. And I've been working on that for a while, and it was fascinating material, technically very difficult. I don't know how clear I was able to make it, but it took a lot of work, and I wanted to do that project because there's no rules with it. It's like maybe over the past couple of years with light work and with a couple other things that I've been involved with, there seems to be a lot of parameters, you know. It's like get to the chorus, all these sorts of things. And even though I do appreciate that and like that, what typically happens for me is once I've done one thing, I put all my energy into that, and then typically the next thing that happens or the next thing I get involved with fundamentally is going to be the opposite, just based on the fatigue of thinking about things in a certain way for so long. So this band from China came along, and their music is crazy. It's like it's all in Mandarin, and it's I don't understand what they're saying. I don't understand what's going on technically with it. The recording was very compromised, but I really enjoyed doing that because it allowed me to figure out my studio. It allowed me to figure out what I'm hearing. It allowed me to solve multitudes of problems. It's like if you have frequencies and harmonic ideas and melodic ideas that are all simultaneously happening, and they're often in dissonance with each other, the idea is to not refine it for them. The idea was to like, well, how do I solve this frequency-wise to at least make it able to be participated in? It's like, how do you make sense out of something that doesn't make sense? And I found that really intriguing. So I mixed that and I delivered it this week. And to the extent that I'm able to do it, I think it's really good. I mean, it's certainly not perfect, but I couldn't have done any better with it, with my current level of technical knowledge. So I had to let it go. And there's another thing, man. I gotta tell you, all you creatives out there, letting it go and recognizing that perfectionism is a scourge. You know, the enemy of the good. Perfection is the enemy of the good. I think there's a lot of hilarity in that as well, because if, like me, you're an imperfect perfectionist, it's just fundamentally absurd, the whole process. But recognizing that, you know, I'm at peace with it. I just do the best that I can. And I suggest you do the same. So Australia, the puzzle, dream piece. Okay, so Devon Townson podcast. I didn't explain it in the ways that I had hoped that I would on the last update. Devon Townson podcast is meant to be a counterpart, which I may have explained, to the process of creating what I'm doing now with the moth and everything else. And it's important to me because it acts in tandem with this, in that it gives a different perspective on the creative process, one that's more about the minutiae of it as opposed to a sort of overarching view, which I guess this is more meant to be. But to distinguish it from these updates, otherwise it's just basically same sort of thing with a different presentation. What I'm going to do is, I realize I know a lot of people, so I'm going to start talking to other musicians and artists, some of which you know, some of which you may not know, in hopes that by having an open dialogue with other artists about this whole process, it will underline the ubiquitous nature of how all these kind of existential dramas in terms of creating are with everybody, all of these musicians, all these artists, every creative. So I do the first interview for that tomorrow, and then the second episode will be with somebody, and we'll see how that plays out. My hope is that that will enhance it so it becomes a really integral part of what happens over the next couple of years. Because again, like I've said over and over, it's not unique to me. None of these things. It's all of us, right? Okay. I bit the bullet and I took out a loan and I got Atmos. So everything that I'm doing, the next Dream Piece thing, the next Dream Piece things, grammar, Dream Piece, the Moth, the melodic stuff, I've been calling it Power Nerd. Everything that I'm going to be doing is not going to be just mixed in Atmos, but I'm going to record it in Atmos. I want it to be specifically, what's the word I'm looking for? I want the process to include it from its inception, so it can become a fundamental part of the composition. I love the idea of immersive audio. So much of my reputation in the past has been, oh, you do the wall of sound, where there's just this huge amount of information that's coming out of these two speakers. And if you're prone to perceiving music as color, to me, a lot of it's just gray. You know, when I do it, it's just gray, because it's to try and make all these things become immersive with two speakers. You have to compress it in a certain way. You have to do frequency cuts and boosts to try and find slots for everything to fit. And by the end, with the amount of ideas that you have, it just doesn't. It sounds like an assault. So by doing it in Atmos, the intent is to try and find a way to represent this vision that I've got for sound in a proper way. It's not meant to be a wall of sound. What it's meant to be is within each melodic idea, harmonically, there exists so much information. And so if you're able to extrapolate from your melodic ideas and then illustrate all those things in some way, the ideas, it's just colorful. It's meant to be, even if it's like, 3 blind mice, it's like, well, what about that melodic idea can you find? Maybe there's like a fluttering thing in the high end. Maybe there's like a swoop that happens down low or whatever. And so, although it's expensive, I have invested in the Atmos trip because, well, not only for the sense of immersive audio and 360 and how you can, all these different streaming platforms offer ways to participate in that, but you can also, and I'm hesitant to believe how Dolby sells this to me. You can fold it down, so by mixing in Atmos, you can have a stereo mix too. That remains to be seen. But there will obviously be stereo, but how easy that will be remains to be seen. But I went with that, and I actually didn't get a bunch of crazy speakers. IK Multimedia makes this pack that's maybe about $5,000, and it'll work, right? So there's that. And then the last thing for today is, so spaceship thing. Once I'm back from Australia, and I'm going to Japan as well for a couple of things, not for a show, but I'll be there, and so I get back in the beginning of, somewhere, middle of somewhere. At that point, I should be finished Ruby Quaker. And so the inaugural flight for that will be probably December. And that's where I'll be doing these updates from here on out. And it's super cool. I've been given a bunch of spaceship parts from some buddies of mine, other musicians, other creatives. They're like, hey, we got these dials and things in the garage. So we've been just putting it all together, and I finished the walls this week. I haven't put the panels on the wall, but there's only so much time in a day. So I'm thinking probably December. I'm going to bring this camera with me when I go on tour so I can continue these updates while I'm away. I found out, last thing for the day, I found out how fragile camera equipment is. So this lens that I'm using here today is borrowed because my tripod fell, and yeah, I bent the lens all to rat shit. So note to self, as much as I have equated the quality of gear in the past and its importance for being in my life being somehow rooted in, can it take abuse? I realize that camera equipment is not that way. So I'm gonna have to learn to be delicate when it comes to gear, because yeah, I've had a camera for 2 weeks and I already busted it. I gotta fix it. That's on my list today. So thanks for participating in the Dream Piece stuff last week if you did. Thanks for being confused in it if you were. Thanks for wondering if it's indicative of a future project for me. It isn't. It's just what I felt like doing and will continue to. This coming week will be the puzzle. You see the film, hear the music. Be just as many people confused by that as there were by Dream Piece. And I leave on Saturday, and my hope is that I'll be able to get some more writing done this week. But I'm starting to come to the conclusion of, as opposed to being frustrated that I haven't been writing and the ideas haven't been flowing in the ways that I would like them to, a big part of it is patience at this point, because I've had to realize that that's clearly not what this time has been for. This has been taking care of them, taking care of her, taking care of him, taking care of them, building, maintaining certain things, keeping my own internal equilibrium balanced so I can be present for the people that need me to be present. And then the patience is part of this process. So by the time I do start writing, really writing, I wouldn't be surprised if a big part of the learning incorporates the frustration and the eventual surrender to that frustration that this period has brought. It's just what it is, man. I'm excited to see what happens. Take care of yourself. I'll talk to you next week from Australia. And yeah, see ya. Thanks. Puzzle week this week. It's weird. Bye-bye.